Dunchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and it's time for a review of the debut album from Mr FijiWiji, Lost, Lost, Lost. Mr FijiWiji is the alias of Brendan Galdo, an American electronic music producer hailing from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Galdo is primarily a producer of CHILLOUT and DOWNTEMPO music, though he has successfully crossed over numerous times into other electronic music subgenres like dubstep and house music. I actually personally have Mr FijiWiji's crossover music to thank for me really getting into him to begin with. Though I had been following Monstercat's releases fairly closely for a couple years and had seen Mr FijiWiji as a really consistently releasing artist on the label, I didn't really start getting into him that much until he released his collaboration Seraphic with Tritonal in 2014. He also had a really long-running house binge that year that really helped pull me over because that was the main style of electronic music I was really into at the time. Kind of ironically though, when Galdo released his Growing Up EP a few months later, the only song I didn't really like that much was the token future house song Believe Her. Beside that, I genuinely thought the EP was no less than stellar. It had some really great inventive vocal chops. Galdo's use of piano struck me in a really emotional way. His choice of vocalists across the board was on point. A year later though, Mr FijiWiji took everything I loved about that project and multiplied it on the EP Dogma. Though the lyrics on that project across the board weren't really anything to boast about, I think the production work was absolutely phenomenal, and I still have this EP on rotation even recently. Given just how well-rounded and enjoyable that EP was, I had kind of hoped from that point that Mr FijiWiji would put out a full-length LP. Little did I know he actually had an LP coming practically right around the corner, but also that the album would be a pretty huge change in pace from Dogma. I feel that Lost, Lost, Lost embodies its title on a number of different layers. There's the feeling of being lost due to a relationship, which is kind of explored on the lyrics of the title track of the album. But then on a deeper level, I also feel that this album captures a period in Galdo's life where he feels lost in his own mind, in his decisions about the future, in his musical direction. Hence why this LP, in my opinion, ends up being his most dark and depressing project to date. I guess the major plus side to that is that this album definitely feels like Galdo's most organically personal project to date. I'd say the downside to that though is that this album ends up being more of a lazy river than it is a roller coaster. It doesn't have a ton of ups and downs, and it ends pretty much where it starts. And by that, I'm not trying to say that this album didn't have some really great moments on it, because it definitely did. But in terms of being a super compelling body of work that I can see myself revisiting time and time again, it's just not quite there. That being said though, it would probably be wise to get into my track-by-track thoughts on this album. I've already talked about the album's title track, at least in regard to its lyrics, but I think production-wise this is probably one of the more shiny moments on the album. The song itself has a really fantastic progression. I like it how Galdo kind of starts out the song with a really simple idea, like a basic vocal, and then kind of grows and builds on it, adding a little more lyrics, more percussion, synths, and melodies. The vocal chops are awesome. Really, there's only a couple negative things I have to say about the song, and that's kind of in its repetitiveness and the simplicity of the lyrics. But like I said, Mr FijiWiji takes that simplicity and does something really cool with it, so this is a good track. One thing that I am a little bit confused about in regards to this track is who exactly provided the vocals for it. If I had to take a guess, I'd probably say it's Lucas Marks, who had an appearance on the song Surrounded from the Dogma EP, but it also sounds like Matt Van in some of the spots on it, and it could be Brendan too, or like a mix of all three of them. I don't know. If anyone has any insight into that, please let me know. Speaking of Matt Van though, he actually has a number of different appearances on this album, which I kind of figured was going to happen considering how often the two have been working together recently. The first of those being Reality is More Beautiful, which is definitely one of the standout tracks on the album for me. For one, this is the point in the album when you can really hear that Mr FijiWiji is going for a drastically different sound than anything he's kind of done before. The percussion is much less electronic focused. It sounds like a legitimate drum set, and just the elements in general are very acoustic focused. Lyrically, I'd say this song is my favorite on the entire album. Matt Van has a very unique writing style in that he's a bit of a realist. He's kind of pessimistic and cynical, but he always has a really beautiful way of wording things. And that definitely shows up in this song, which I kind of see as the antithesis of The Real World by Owl City, Where Adam Young would say, reality is a lovely place, but I wouldn't want to live there, Matt Van says, actually, reality is more beautiful, and dreaming is a prison. Despite that, the song kind of ends up being the brightest and most happy song on the entire album. This right here is the high. It all kind of goes down from there. Regardless, though, I think the song had some fantastic songwriting on Brendan's part as well. I really enjoyed the melodies in both the violins and the synths. Moving forward, though, I really enjoyed Holly Drummond's appearance on the song Something to Hold. I think her and Mr FijiWiji are a match made in heaven. How this is the first time they've collaborated without Direct being involved is completely beyond me. I honestly would have liked to see her show up more on this album beyond just Something to Hold, maybe in a duet with Matt Van or something. Can't really change that, I guess. But you know, her one appearance is pretty worthwhile, so I guess I can't really complain that much. And I will say, the synth line that comes in just after, I think, 2 minutes into the song, it just absolutely rips into me. I love it. The song The Idealist is the first of many instrumental tracks we get on this album. Don't really think it stands out a ton. It's got a really nice, soothing piano line that I really like, but that's really all I have to say about it. It also shares some minor similarities to Mr FijiWiji's 2012 song The Mentalist, although I don't think it shares enough similarities to really call it a sequel. Moving on to track number 5, we've got To Belong, which is the sole non-vocal collaboration on the album, co-produced by Exist Strategy, and I generally do like the songs that Mr FijiWiji and Exist Strategy do together, although I wouldn't necessarily say this is my favorite work they've ever done together. The thing I probably like about it the most is those deep, belting strings. It is a bit repetitive though for my taste. I think it could have used a bit more variation or maybe a vocal. Even the vocal chops that it does have are kind of stagnant and steady. They don't really go anywhere. Regardless, I think it's a good tune, maybe my favorite of the instrumentals. Mortality to me is a bit of an interesting tune. It sounds like it could have fit very snug on like deadmau5's While One Is Less Than Two album. It's got that very chill vibe with the percussion and the background elements, and then the chords to me are very deadmau5-y. Although I would say the vocal chops in the song are very, very Mr FijiWiji. I would never expect to find that in a deadmau5 song, so it's a clear enough line there. Like I was saying about sequels earlier with The Idealist and The Mentalist, there are some actual direct sequels on this album, one being Daisy Part 2, which is a sequel to Matt Van's original song Daisy. And Daisy is one of Matt's tunes that I think is a little bit too aggressive for its own good, so I actually like Mr FijiWiji's take on the track. It's more of a remix than it is like a direct sequel. All the lyrics and everything are pulled, but I think the vocals were re-recorded to kind of fit better on this. I could be wrong about that. The backing strings in this rendition are really nice. The break is absolutely awesome and it fills out very nicely. And as with a lot of tracks on this album, the vocal chops are very cool, very unique. Really enjoy them. Matt's vocals in general just sound really cool chopped up, so that could be part of it. I'm Alright, strangely enough, was another track that I was getting more of a deadmau5 vibe on. This time, more than While One Is Less Than Two, I was kind of getting an album title Goes Here sound a little bit, especially in just the drum line that's going on. Although I don't want to say it's like a deadmau5 ripoff, because that's definitely not the case. It's just the kind of vibe I'm getting from it. One of my favorite synth lines, too, on the entire album is on this particular song, and I think it's probably one of the standouts from the instrumentals. I think it's definitely up there with To Belong. I might even like it more, even if it's got more of an interlude feel than To Belong does. The album's 9th track, Friendly Ghost, is another one that I don't really have a ton to say about. It's got some really cool, uplifting melodies, which is interesting considering the majority of the album is so dark and depressing, but the song's underlying chords are definitely a little bit more dark. And then it has kind of a soft crackle in the background. It could just be like a regular, like, old vinyl crackle. But it really adds to the more ambient elements, I guess, that the track has. It's probably the most ambient song on the album. And then looking toward the end, the album closes with a revamped version of Mr FijiWiji's 2012 song, Let the Sky Fall Down. Although this version is drastically, and I mean drastically, different than the original, I guess there's some similar chord structuring, some similar melodies, and some of the same lyrics have kind of carried over, but other than that, it's a completely different song. For one, the kind of drum and bass bass beat of the original has been completely stripped and kind of replaced with a more down-tempo beat. Matt's beautiful vocals add a ton to the song, really leaves the album on a much warmer tone. Even if the lyrics are kind of dark and depressing like the rest of the album is, there's some awesome melodies thrown into this track that weren't in the original, especially that synth line that comes in at 2 minutes and 30 seconds. It's absolutely perfect. There's also a lot of really cool underlying production tricks that are going on throughout this song that made me leave the album feeling really satisfied. So in a way, though this is probably my favorite track on the album, I'm really glad it ended up coming in at the end. Nonetheless, this album is enjoyable as it is. I wouldn't really say I absolutely love it, but this is certainly one of the more enjoyable albums to have released this year so far. I think its biggest crime, at least in my book, is that it's just a little bit too stagnant. It doesn't really pack as much punch as something like Dogma, but it's not really trying to either. It's definitely a solid step in a new direction for Mr FijiWiji, and though I do enjoy this direction a lot, I don't think he completely hit the nail on the head. Regardless, I'm really happy this album happened, and generally I would say I'm feeling more satisfied with it than I am dissatisfied. So for Lost, 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 I am probably feeling a light 7 out of 10. If you guys haven't checked out this one for yourselves, I would definitely suggest you do. The Spotify link is down in the description below. And if you have listened to this album, make sure to let me know what you think down in the comments section. As always, I'm Landon Remixes. I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and I'll catch you later. Peace.